Hello, friends, and welcome back to the Internet Writing Buddies podcast featuring the graceful Renegade with balloons flying around everywhere.
Wow, that was
Uh,
spectacular.
I
Cool.
feel like,
I like that.
wow, this is going to be a thing. I feel like I have to be the visual description track for the listeners, but those of you that are watching us on video just saw a bunch of virtual balloons appear out of nowhere, as if Grace was gracefully farting them out. And I am the dork in the road.
I was under the impression that it was like the whole like Grace always likes a good party type of vibe, but farting out balloons also works if that's the way we want to go.
I mean, to be fair, if you're farting out balloons, there's pretty much a party happening wherever that's happening.
That's true.
Like,
some IPA is being consumed as well.
be real. A party would spontaneously erupt, and I mean erupt.
Yeah, literally.
Under that term. Anyway, I'm the dork in the road from the YouTubes. Some people call me Ben, because that's my name. But and we're here hosting the podcast, and I am barely alive after one of the most difficult weekends of my life.
Yes, you are. Where apparently Ben was wheeling over logs, and I loved getting messages from him throughout the weekend, basically like, dude, I'm dying. Dude, I'm dying. So, Ben, you should talk about what you did this weekend just to fill everybody in.
Well, I'm a little paranoid about going back to Canada in a month because I got my ass kicked so hard last week. And so I've started doing things like signing up for trainings and whatnot to like get myself ready. And so I signed up for this 2-day training, dirt bike training with Shane Watts, former enduro champion Shane Watts, because it was happening very close to where I live at the old Rock Hill MX facility, which is now closed and kind of abandoned, but I see it all the time, and I've always wanted to ride there, so it was like total win-win. I need some training, I get to check this place out, whatever. Anyway, I was way over my head. Like, I am probably the kiddie pool of off-road riders, and we were jumping off the high dive, or at least Shane does. I at least, no kidding, 3 times, there was something that I was 100%, like, I'm not this is not hyperbole, I was 100% sure I would never be able to do. Right? He's like, okay, we're going to do stoppies now. And I was like, I can't do a stoppie. I'll never be able to do a stoppie.
Wait, so explain what a stoppie is too, just in case there are noobs here who don't know what the hell a stoppie is.
It's a backwards wheelie. You grab the front brake as hard as you can to get the rear tire off the ground. And I was like, I'm not going to be able to do that. I'm going to die. And 5 minutes later, I was doing it. And like, not consistently, because on that 250F, that's the other thing, is I was the only one on a Japanese bike. Everyone else was on 2 strokes, most of KTM's, Huskies. There was a Beta. There was one guy on a Yamaha 2-stroke, but it broke, so he wasn't on it the whole time. But I was on big heavy bike, so like I have to, like he's like, okay, just when we're talking about wheelies later, he's like, just gently let the clutch out. And for me, it's like, nope, you have to just let go because there just isn't enough otherwise. And it's the same with the front brake. Like, you just have to do the thing that you've been training yourself to not do the whole time you've been riding a motorcycle, which is a fistful of front brake. So that, and then the second day, it's like, okay, we're going to do wheelies now. And I was like, I can't do a wheelie. I will never be able to do a wheelie. And 5 minutes later, I was doing wheelies.
Okay, and on the contrary, you were doing wheelies. Like, you were. So.
That's not the contrary. That's what I just said.
Anyway.
And then.
Sorry.
Okay,
I need more coffee like someone else I know today. Continue, please.
No, it's a hell of a day. And then the last thing we did was riding over a 2-foot log. And we rode over there, and he was like demonstrating. And again, this is going to sound like I'm making it up. It's not. I sat there just with my forearms on the handlebars, just slumped over like, can I just sit here and know? There is no way I will be able to do that. And the thing I always say is, like, if you can't picture yourself succeeding at something, you probably shouldn't do it. Like, if you look at a line and you're like, I can't ride that, you'll crash. Like, that's what happens. He was saying the 4 fundamentals. The 4th one is confidence. And I had none. And so I just sat there. I was like, I'm going to watch this and see how it goes. But oh no, you can't do that shit with Shane. Like, he kept calling me out and forcing me to come over. And next thing I knew, I was easing up to the log and then popping the front wheel up and then working my way over. And then the next time it was pop it up and keep going. And then the third time he's like, okay, don't even stop. So I came up, popped the front wheel up, rode over. And then I was feeling really good about myself because I accomplished that mildly consistently. And then for some reason he decided I also needed to master the 180 or the 90-degree log hop pivot turn technique where you stand parallel to the log, pop the
Yeah.
front up over the log, and then ride it over. And
Yeah.
I was like,
God.
and so he made me do it in front of the whole class, like just me. And I just kept failing and failing. And I was just like, this is not even a skill I want to learn. And I'm like shaking my head. And he's like, nope, we don't shake our head. You're going to do it. And I was like, geez, I did eventually do it. But anyway, I seriously thought about not going back the second day because I was so sore
Yeah.
and just like, I'm just out. I'm the most out of shape on the slowest, heaviest bike. And I just, it's not skills that like I need to. Riding as fast as possible is never my goal. Now,
Yeah.
I want to be able to in case I get into a situation where I've taken a corner too fast or something.
Right.
But it's just like the things that we're doing in this class are not skills that I ever thought I would learn. And it was
Right.
great. And no disrespect to anyone. I just was way over my head. And I kudos to Shane for pushing me. And the shit that I was able to do was kind of unbelievable. But I'm sort of feeling mildly normal now, today, 4 days later. Recovering from my muscle aches and all that.
Well, let me just say I'm so proud of you for surviving that weekend. Also, I'm so glad, just for listeners and viewers who don't sit in on Ben and my text messages. Ben was trying to convince me to go with him, and all I can say is I'm so glad that I wasn't like, I'm just gonna go, because I had a lot of filming I was doing this weekend, and I was still like, thinking about possibly like trying to pop over there and join him. And I'm so glad I didn't, because I would have died. Like, I would have been suffering so bad, because that's above my skill set. But I'm so proud of you for getting through it, because it also looked like the video you sent me looked like a lot of fun, but just like a lot of gritting it out and just like making yourself do it over and over again.
I have too fun for sure. And it's funny because halfway through the second day, Shane and I were talking at lunch, and he's like, "Oh yeah, my favorite is brand new riders because you can, they can see the improvement." And I was like, I realize that you think that, but
Yeah.
nothing that you're doing here is something that a brand new rider could do. Like,
No.
your perspective is so skewed because you are world champion Shane Watts, but
Yeah.
like I would, if I took my daughter to that, she couldn't do anything. Like,
Yeah. I mean, and that is kind of the skewed perspective sometimes, I think, of these like hyper advanced level riders, is they like have this idea that it's easier than it is because they've been doing it for so long and they're so skilled at it. But like, you throw a noob into something like that, or me for that matter, who's, still getting confidence back, probably an intermediate level dirt rider at best, and like I would have got my ass kicked. It would have been terrible. I would have been so miserable.
I
So
mean, yeah, and I kept waiting for him to let me off the hook because I just
yeah,
wasn't as good.
yeah.
It just didn't
No,
happen.
it doesn't happen that way. Yeah. Well,
Uh,
I'm glad you're starting to feel less sore today, because I know you were dying on
I
Monday.
took Monday off. Like, I just sat and just lived off ibuprofen.
Yeah. Well, that's all you can do sometimes, Anyway, but
Yeah.
that's not what we're talking about today. What
Well,
are we talking about today, Ben?
it kind of is, right?
Well, it is,
Speaking of
yes.
kind of maybe overestimating your skills and making poor decisions when you start out, but if you go on Marketplace, go on Facebook Marketplace, because we don't go on Craigslist anymore, sadly, because they started charging. So instead, we pay with our personal data to Facebook.
Yes.
But there are hundreds of low mileage, fully farkled dual sport and adventure bikes on Marketplace if you look.
Mhm.
And I mean fully farkled, like $2,500. A farkle is a functional sparkle. Someone always asks, it's just like crash bars and tires and seats and mirrors and all the
Yeah.
stuff that you put on an adventure bike to make
Yeah.
it yours and make it set up for whatever you want to do. Same thing for dual sport. But like, first thing I do is put a shit ton of mods on a bike. Those are farkles. But you'll see bikes with $2,000 worth of stuff on them, 600 miles.
Right.
Or you'll see, like, I bought, best example is my 450L. I bought it for $7,700. That's a bike that is $11,000 new with 600 miles on it.
Right.
And it's because people go in and they get the bike that they want to be able to ride eventually. They get their dream bike, their destination bike, or they get upsold by an unscrupulous salesman. This is what I think happens a lot with the 450 500s. They're like,
yeah,
you could get a 300, but a 450 is only a little bigger. Wrong. It's a very different motorcycle.
Yeah. Very different.
So, and the debate I often see online, and one that I thought it was worth having a conversation with the genius, the intellect, the insightful Grace, is this debate about whether or not starter bikes, so-called starter bikes, are a bad thing. Whether you should buy a starter bike, a bike that you're ready for at the time, and learn on it, or whether
Right.
you should buy a bike that you can grow into. Um, this will not be a debate because I think we're on the same page
Yeah.
personally, but I think it's bad advice when someone says, buy the bike that you will grow into because you'll get bored of or outgrow the
Right.
smaller, easier to ride bike. And, we're going to talk about financial concerns. This is not supposed to be like, well, money. I understand that the compulsion is to buy one bike, fix
Right.
up
Yeah.
one
Yeah.
bike. But I personally feel like your safety and potential future as a rider is more important than saving some money. What do you
Right.
think?
Oh, I totally agree with you. I mean, I went through this before I bought my first ADV bike, which was the Honda, the 2021 CB500X. And
You
one
had
of the
an
reasons,
X900 GS or something.
what?
I
Oh,
thought
my
you had.
700? Yeah, but I think, to be fair, when I had my F700, my GS, I didn't really take it off road ever. Like, it was my touring bike. So I would ride to campsites and tour around Oregon and stuff like that. But I was never doing like advanced level ADV terrain on that bike. I was barely even going on gravel occasionally. So I definitely don't think a GS is going to be your starter bike if you're getting into ADV riding. I when I started working with Ride Adventures, the first big ADV tour I did was on a CB500X, and it was a bike I was super comfortable on and I loved it. And so I came home and I bought one, even though at the same time, after that first trip, I did have a lot of people trying to talk me into buying a T7 or a bigger bike or even an Africa Twin because, at that point, I was gaining so much momentum with my learning that they're like, you're going to be into this bike in no time and move on from the CB500X. And the reality was the CB500X was the better bike for me. And I'm so glad I ended up buying it, even though it's considered a lower level ADV bike, because even though I do feel like at this point I sold the Rain and I bought a new bike, I bought the Trans Up, like I'm super happy with that upgrade. I don't ever feel like buying a T7 at that point in my ADV riding would have been a good idea, or any other bigger bike for that matter, because I wasn't ready for it yet.
Yeah, you put 30,000 miles on that bike, right? Like,
Yeah.
you had plenty
Yeah.
of time to learn and grow
Yes.
on.
I mean, and that was in a year. I mean, and I rode 50,000 miles in 14 months. So it was a lot of miles. Now, granted, a lot of those were road miles, but that was also a lot of weird roads and weird places too. So it's just a give and a take. But, I'm with you 100% on this. I think it's stupid to buy a bike you'll grow into because you get in over your head and then you get into situations that you can't handle because the bike is just too much.
Yeah, if you have to grow into it, then by definition, it's too big for you,
Yes,
right?
exactly. Yeah.
And I think it's probably worth clarifying that dual sport and venture are going to be a little different. This also, I think, applies to street bikes. That's not really what we're
Yeah.
talking about today, but you wouldn't go out and buy an R6, or you shouldn't.
Yeah.
But a starter entry level adventure bike might be a 500X, right? Because your
Right.
eventual goal is to get onto an Africa Twin or something.
Right.
Whereas a dual sport, it might be a TW200 or
Right.
KLX 230. And the other thing I think is probably worth mentioning before the comments start exploding is people get really offended when you say entry level bike or beginner friendly bike, as if that
Yeah.
somehow means that only beginners can ride it. Because they'll come in and be like, well, I ride 300X and I have all this experience. I know, me too. Like,
Yeah.
just because it is possible for a new rider to ride it doesn't mean that an experienced rider can't enjoy and get more out of it.
Absolutely. Yeah. I mean, and I think that's the thing that, like, I don't know why people get so butthurt about that just because it's an easier bike to ride. There's nothing wrong with that. In fact, that makes your riding experience better. But I do think, kind of with the crossover with road bikes versus ADV and dual sport bikes, think of the horror stories we all have heard about our guy friends, because honestly it's guys doing this more than it is women, let's be fair.
Testosterone is a
But
hell of a
there's
drug.
there's so many young guys that go buy these bikes that are way too much power for them, and then they end up getting hurt and having a bad experience, and it's because they're not ready for it. They don't have the skill set for it and they don't understand the power yet. I mean, this is also why what a lot of people in the US don't know is that when you're getting your motorcycle license anywhere but here, you have to graduate up through CC levels of bikes and prove your skill set, starting on a lower CC bike and then moving up. And that's something that we don't have in the States. You know, once you get through your endorsement, it's kind of like, bye, have
Good luck.
fun.
Yeah.
Don't do anything too stupid. I mean, in my home state of Missouri, they rescinded the helmet law, and
Yeah.
now it's the number one state with the most motorcycle fatalities. So we're a little behind the times when it comes to safety in that regard. But one of the reasons why Europeans do that is obviously because there's a lot of motorcycles and scooters there, and it's important to keep people safe. And how they do that is by making you go through different courses to prove your skill set on a bike or a scooter for that matter.
Yeah, that's like here in America, my daughter just finished her endorsement class and she could go out and buy a R1
Yeah.
tomorrow.
Yeah.
I mean, she couldn't get financing, but if she had the cash, they'd sell it to her.
Yeah. Oh, I know. But yeah,
Uh,
I mean that thought alone is kind of terrifying when you think about it, that somebody can do that, you know?
yeah, yeah, and the male thing is interesting that you mention it because it's like Dallas said, the biggest enemy of the 250F, the dirt bike that I bought, is male egos. It's super
Yeah.
underrated because nobody wants to be on the. And even at that training, Shane was like, "Well, you're on the foo-foo bike." Like it was a running gag, and it's like
Yeah.
this is all I need for the type of trail riding that I do. I have nothing
Right.
to prove, and I beat several of you in drag races, so
Yeah.
the best part was the braking drill. I kicked everyone's ass because I wasn't going as fast.
Yeah. Exactly.
It was
And
super funny.
it's that perspective. I mean, it's actually funny. I was talking with Tiffany about this the other day because Tiffany obviously is just coming back to dirt bike riding after her accident, a year and a half ago. And we're both kind of, I had an accident a year and a half ago, almost 2 years ago now too, that I'm still like mentally recovering from. And so, we're both talking about not riding like we used to and being a little more chill and being grandmas on bikes, just because that's the vibe you get after you have a wreck like that. Whereas I see a lot of guys just get right back out there and put the pressure on themselves to ride just as insane as they were before. And I just think that's silly, like that ego aspect of it. Just obviously it exists with some women, but for the most part, most dirt riders, dual sport riders, ADV riders that are female are pretty chill. They just want to be outside and have a good time.
Yeah,
So
you don't want to do the Top Gun thing. Don't let your ego write checks that your ass can't cash. And
no,
I think
because yeah,
it
yeah,
becomes, well, part of it is friend group influence, right? So
yeah,
you have a bunch of friends that ride. Well, they all ride 450s and 500s. They're awesome, right? So you think you need to get the bike that they have, but
right,
and that's what they'll recommend to you because good riders, experienced riders, especially ones that started as kids, forget what it's like to be new. They don't remember.
yeah,
It's a little bit like how much trouble I had teaching kids like to write when I first started teaching because
oh
it
yeah,
has been easy for me for so long that I forget what it's like to not instantly recognize when your sentence is missing a verb or it's a fragment or there's a proposition at the or whatever. Like
yeah,
you forget because it's not a skill you never had to think about, and it's the
right.
same thing.
I mean, it's same type of comparison, but a completely different industry. When I was teaching yoga class all the time, I was teaching advanced level classes for a long period of time, and then I got asked to do a beginner's course, and I didn't even know how to begin with that myself because I had forgotten that like some people can't touch their toes at all, and some people can't really be like halfway upside down. Like it's just you have to like have those moments where you're almost humbled by the fact that you're like, oh, I need to like level down and try to understand where that comes from. And that's exactly how dirt and dual sport and ADV riding are. It's just the better you get, the easier it is to forget where the basics come from.
Right. Well, you don't, and the fundamentals are the fundamentals, but speed and confidence will get you through a lot.
Yeah,
And you forget how hard it is to do those things slower. But
right.
this is not to shame new riders, but in fact to encourage you to make decisions where your safety is a consideration. I think I see that far. It's sort of taboo to think about. Like, what do you mean you wear all your gear all the time?
Right.
But your safety and enjoyment and your future in this sport, this hobby, whatever you want to call it, is the most important thing. And when
Yeah.
people start with a bike that's too big for them, a lot of things can happen. It's hard to ride, so you get frustrated and quit. You can't do what you want to do.
Yeah.
It's scary. Dallas talked about this when we had him on, to drop or damage a bike that you spent $24,000 on.
Yeah.
It's a lot less scary to drop a bike that you spent $3,000 on at Marketplace.
Yeah, exactly. And I think that is one of the beautiful things about adventure motorcycle riding and dual sport riding is when people do outgrow their bikes and move on, they do sell them because otherwise they're just going to sit in the garage anyway. I mean, that's why even after swearing for over a year that I was never going to sell Lorraine, I sold her because you'd have those moments where you kind of eat your own words and you go, well, I need a new bike and this needs to go to somebody that can actually use it. I don't want that bike to sit in a garage, then put all those
Exactly.
miles on her to never be ridden again, you know? So, and at that point too, it's almost like passing the torch on of like, cool, now somebody else gets to learn, you know, now somebody else is set up for success. And, you know, and there we go. And that's such a nice thing to be able to pass on as we move on to better bikes, you know?
Yeah, and to that point, because I think one of the biggest arguments against the whole starter bike, and I don't even like that term, just a smaller bike that is more easy for you, a learning, whatever. They're
Yeah.
all kind of demeaning. Is financial, but at least around here, I can't speak to the rest of the country or the world,
No.
but I very rarely sell a dual sport for much less than I paid for it. So
Yeah.
even if you bought a bike and rode it for a couple years, you're out maybe $500, $1,000. But like, isn't it worth that? Like, wouldn't you pay that to have that bike for a couple years and know that you're building your skills and building a solid foundation so that when you upgrade to your next level bike, you appreciate it, you can tell
Yeah.
the difference, and you've got your skills and confidence built up. Like, yes, it costs more money to buy one bike, ride it for a while, and then get another. But the other thing is, you're probably going to do that anyway.
Yep.
Nobody buys their perfect bike the first time.
No.
You
I
don't
mean,
know what you don't know.
it's kind of a concept that I don't remember who I was having this conversation with a couple weeks ago, but there is no such thing as a perfect bike for you anymore. If you are continuing to learn on a motorcycle and you're continuing to ride, especially when you start to get into different forms of riding, you know, there's never going to be one bike for you. And having that knowledge ahead of time before you get into this sport is super important because you're not just going to come in and buy a bike and it's going to be your all-purpose tool. It's you're going to have this bike until you get the next one, or maybe you get an ADV bike, but then you get super into dual sport riding. You want something a little smaller, a little more capable versus having a giant ATAS in your garage. And so you switch it up. You know, it's just, you don't know what direction you're going to go. And maybe you want to do road riding after that for a while. I don't know. It's just, it's such a multifaceted sport. I love it so much. But the idea that there is one perfect bike for you, or even two or three perfect bikes for you, is ludicrous.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, yeah. But like if you told me 2 years ago that I would purposefully buy a dirt bike, I'd have been like, what? Why? I only buy bikes I can ride on the road, but
Yeah.
going to Canada changed my mind. A few other disadvantages when you start on a bike that's too big for you. I love how we're weaving in and out of the topic, but I don't want to lose
Yeah.
the sort of overarching idea. Is it's scary to drop a heavy bike, right? You think about that way more when you're on a 500-pound bike than you do on a 250-pound dirt bike. I dropped it over a log 10 times and I didn't even care until I tried to ride back and my shift lever was bent and I couldn't shift up, so I had to go back in first gear. That was the first time I gave a
Yeah.
shit about dropping it all day. You're far more likely to hurt yourself on a bigger bike. I've seen that several
Yeah.
times in person. Everything's harder, and not just a little bit harder. Everything is harder, particularly when you're talking about off-road skills on a bigger bike. It is remarkable, when you're lucky enough to have both. Like I was riding that dirt bike all weekend, and then I was moving the 790 around, and that is a bike that I feel like is exceptionally easy to ride, lightweight, well balanced. But I got on, I was like, "What is this massive barge?" Like the
Yeah.
difference is marked.
Yeah.
So, and you'll build bad habits. You'll hesitate. You'll do things the wrong way. You won't fully commit to things. Like I had that 250L with the stock tires forever, and around here, you're riding trails, you're riding in the mud, and like I couldn't ride side hill on anything. I always 100% ended up in the bottom of the rut because I just didn't have
Right.
the traction. So I started aiming for the bottom of ruts. And when I got new tires, it took me a really long time to figure out that was bad, and I didn't need to do that. But that was a bad
Yeah.
habit that I built.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, I think one of my bigger arguments too is like until you feel comfortable being able to pick up one of those big ass heavy bikes by yourself in a weird circumstance on a hill, like I don't I don't think it's worth getting one because there's always going to be that one time. And I think that is a mistake you make if you get a bike that's just a little too much for you initially, like get a bike that you can handle on your own. I mean, that's the biggest thing is most of the time we are going to be riding with buddies and with other people, but there are going to be those moments when you need to be able to take care of yourself And if you can't pick up your bike or manage the weight of that bike in a bad situation, which a lot of the more powerful and bigger ADV bikes are, like, don't get it. Get something you can manage. It's not about who has the most power or the most weight. It's about what is more comfortable for you to ride and be on in those tough spots.
Yeah, and it's funny. There's two sides to what you're saying. Because manage, meaning physical strength, can you pick it up? But also, you have to build the confidence and the skill to commit to things harder on a heavier bike, because it's
Absolutely.
either get through or die. And so,
Yeah.
it's you don't want to be stopping on a rocky, crappy uphill on a big bike and trying to get it rolling again. You have to get through, and you
Yeah.
don't have the confidence or the skill to look at the top of the hill and say, "I'm 100% getting there." If you just haven't practiced it, you can build
Right.
that skill a lot easier on a smaller bike.
Yeah. I mean, I'm a prime example of that. The first adventure, like big time adventure riding I did, the only reason I survived that those 8 days when I was in Baja was because one, I had no fear, but two, I just had the beginner confidence and crushed it as much as I could. But it was also because I was on a bike that I could handle at the time. So I was on the CB500, which is a great bike to learn on, which is a great bike to make those mistakes on and nearly crack my head open many times and, fall in mud and do all that, because then I would go down and I'd be able to get back up. And then when I was succeeding, it was great and it got easier every time. But if I had been on a different, heavier bike, I would probably not have survived that trip. And that's just kind of the reality of it.
Yep. Yep.
Yep.
So, advantages to starting small. There are
Hmm.
many.
Many.
One, they're cheaper. The bike is cheaper. So,
Yes.
you know, financial concern is one that people have, but it takes a lot longer to save up for a $10,000 bike than it does for a $4,000 bike,
Right.
that you can then be riding and learning on while you save up the difference or whatever,
Right.
knowing that you're going to sell that bike when it's time to move on to the new one.
Yep.
Easier to learn and build confidence, right? You care less if you drop it. You don't worry about damaging it as much. It's easier to pick up and manage, like you're saying. You're less likely to get hurt because, one, you're just overall less likely to crash, and two, getting
Yep.
pinned underneath a light dual sport is a lot different than getting pinned underneath a big adventure bike.
Yes.
Other
Yes.
advantages of starting small:
Other advantages of starting small. I think
insurance
the
is cheaper.
say that again.
Insurance is cheaper.
Yeah.
Insurance
I
much cheaper.
I think one of the big ones that I always think about with starting smaller is just CCs smaller, because there's some moments where like you just don't need, like, versus a 500 versus like a 1250. The jump between those is substantial, especially when you are in those tough spots. Like, if you're starting out, you don't need all of that power to get up a hill. You need to just figure out how to utilize that power to start and then go. And I feel like you do have a lot of people that get on an Africa Twin or a GS or whatever else, and they don't really know what to do with it. So I think being able to appreciate that the difference in power is going to make you a more capable and skillful rider. And if you're jumping into the deep end of the pool with that to start, you're gonna have a hard time managing that motorcycle, especially on hills or water crossings. Oh my god. Yeah.
Yeah, perfect example. I was on a 250L and wanted to get an adventure bike, and I was shopping for V-Strom 650s because that's actually a very logical step up from where I was.
Right.
But I found a really nice, well farkled Africa Twin for a good price, and I bought it instead. And I was just scared shitless most of the time I was on that bike. And I had some off-road riding experience, but I was not ready for it. All I could think about was how heavy it was. And I took it some places, not usually by myself, thankfully, but there's more than one time when I was by myself headed out camping, and I remember one time I was trying to turn around it was like a dead end, and I got on a little bit of uneven ground, and I couldn't get my right foot down all the way to get the kickstand up, but I'd already leaned over too far, and so I was just kind of stuck right where I couldn't get one side or the other. And I was like, what
Yeah.
am I going to, I'm stuck here. I can't get either foot all the way down, and I
Yeah.
can't get this kickstand up. What do I do? And I eventually managed to get it leaned over enough to get it. But I was just like, these are stupid problems to have when you just don't. It was fully loaded. I just hadn't built the confidence and the skill to be doing. Yeah, it slowed down my progress, I guess, is the point I'm trying to make. It wasn't until I got back on a smaller bike and started to really progress and get some
Right.
training that that I undid some of those bad habits and fears.
Right. Yeah, and that's just prime example of one of the many circumstances you can get into with a bike that's too heavy, difficult to manage, and whatever else. Like, I know you touched on this a little bit earlier, but that fear of dropping the bike can be a lot sometimes, especially when you're starting out. But I think the best thing to learn early on is that the whole point of having the crash bars and the system on your bike is so that you do drop it and that you do learn. As you get better, you're going to drop it less, but regardless, that bike's always going to come down at some point, and you just need to kind of be able to accept that and accept the fact that, like, you're going to drop it. You're going to crash. I mean, I think we talked about this last week. Like, I am the queen of parking lot drops. Like, oh my God. Like, just because, especially when I have luggage on the bike, like, I just, weight will go a weird direction and I just can't even deal with it. It's down. So, once you can kind of wrap your head around the fact that those bikes are okay to be dropped, that's why we have the crash systems. It'll help a lot. But that also takes time and dropping and crashing.
Yeah, I knew, like, I always told myself when I got that bike that I was going to take it over to the field by the house and kick it over and
Yeah.
pick it up. So I know that I could, but I could
Yeah.
never even bring myself to do that. So then I spent the whole time in the woods just terrified. And then finally, I've got it on video actually. We went moto camping. I loaded everything up. I started to take off, and the rear wheel was on top of a rock. And I was like, I'll just give it gas and get over. Well, I
Yeah.
didn't. And it went, the first time I ever dropped that Africa Twin was out at a campsite. It took me like 2 seconds to pick it up.
Yeah.
Granted, I wasn't by myself, but suddenly everything was a lot less scary when I knew
Yeah.
how easy it was to just for the longest time, because the most expensive bike I'd ever bought, I was like, I don't want to drop this. I don't want to damage this. It's my beautiful,
Right.
pristine Angel, right? Which you got to get over that right away, which is what a dual sport will teach you. But, after that, I was like, oh, awesome. People drop big bikes all the time. And I cared a hell of a lot less.
Yeah. Yeah. I don't know what it is. I think there's I think there's good intentions behind this idea that you grow into a bike. But I just think, especially if you are new to dual sport and ADV riding, it's really one of the biggest mistakes you can make, and also one of the fastest ways to get you to give up on the sport in general, because you can get frustrated and flustered, and if you don't have a bike that fits where your skill set is at, you're going to want to quit. You're going to want to give up on pursuing that. It's just, it kind of deflates and takes all the wind out of your sails very quickly.
Yep. Back to my initial point. There's so many of those bikes for sale because people bought a bike they couldn't handle and decided that it wasn't for them, it wasn't fun, it's too hard, or they hurt themselves, or
Yeah.
their significant other saw them hurt themselves and decided that they were not going to be doing that anymore.
Yeah.
You should not learn to ride off road. You should not learn to ride off road on an adventure bike.
Right.
That's for someone, it's for people with experience. It just is. And I hate to say this because it is not my goal to discourage people, but I'm not going to compromise your safety with bad advice either.
No.
You should learn to ride off road on a dual sport. You should buy a PW200 and ride it until you've hit the absolute limit and then upgrade.
Yeah, I agree. I mean, I think starting small is a really, really good idea. There is a huge part of me that wishes I grew up in an environment where I learned to ride off-road first. Unfortunately, I learned on-road, and my first bike was a Honda Shadow. It was like 2007. It was a great bike, and I rode the hell out of that bike, and I loved it. But I think the best way to really learn is just to get on something small, get out, and just ride until you feel like you're really, really pushing the bike versus yourself. So.
Yep. And to your earlier point, another reason not to full commit on an expensive, big, heavy bike is you don't know what you don't know. You might. That's why I love dual sports. I call them the ultimate discovery machine because you can try everything. It's the serial variety pack. They even make those anymore of motorcycling. You can try a little trail riding and do a little moto camping. You can go on a long tour, whatever. Because you might think you want a 1290 adventure, but in reality, you never ride more than 50 miles from home, and you like to do crappy abandoned logging roads. Well, that bike makes no sense.
Yeah, exactly.
Or you might think you need a 500 EXCF because you want to rip up the most hardcore trails, and it turns out you actually like driving across the country and moto camping. Not a good bike for that.
Yeah, exactly. And that's, I think what we're coming around to is this is a wonderful sport that you can cater to your needs very easily. There's so many options available. And, you can really, if you do the research, you can find the right bike for where you are right now. It's just one, realizing that sometimes you're going to start small and build into bigger. And two, you want to do it that way anyway so that you actually have an enjoyable experience. But there's no reason to go buy a giant motorcycle with a ton of power if you're not ready for it. It's just going to end up being trouble. Big trouble.
Yep. So some caveats,
Yes.
because everyone has a unique situation.
Mhm.
Say you have a lot of street bike experience and you live 2 hours from the nearest forest road. Well, then starting small might not mean a 250L. It might mean a DR650, right?
Yes.
You need a bike that can get you there, but still do the things in the woods.
Right.
Maybe it's a Versys X300 if you know you want to ride adventure bikes. Start with a small adventure bike that you can build some skills on. And if you have a lot of street experience, you can skip ahead a little, but you still shouldn't be learning to ride off-road on a big, heavy bike.
No, definitely not. And it's also, like if you are having those days like I did when I was really in my learning process where I was going out and doing, all sorts of different routes on my own and taking my time, like you want to be on a bike that is comfortable. But again, like you said, like if you're going to take roads to get there, you need a bike that's going to handle road riding too. So just being mindful of what you need versus what somebody is telling you need to do is usually best case scenario across the board.
Yeah, a lot of time expert advice is you got to consider how the imagination of the person giving it to you, can they imagine your perspective, or are they giving advice that makes sense for them?
Yeah, just like everything, take it with a grain of salt and do what's best for yourself. But if you're starting out, it's better to start small than to get in above your head. It'd be both Ben and my advice, I think.
Don't take bike advice from somebody that you wouldn't trust to not take you down a trail you can't handle.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah.
Nathan.
Yeah. Nathan,
Although
looking
I
at
wouldn't take
you.
Nathan's advice, but I don't trust him when he's like, it's easy. Because what's easy to Nathan is not easy to me.
Well, you and I talked about this a few weeks ago. Like I had a riding day where I got out with my dirt bike. I was going to go ride with some friends. And I got out there and I knew like I was just getting over being sick for like over a month. And, we were going to go do some dirt trails out at Klein. And I know Klein very well. And I feel very lucky about that. But the minute we got out there, the leader of our group was trying to throw us into some like black diamond trails single track, and I literally stopped my bike, turned around and rode back to my truck and loaded up and left because I know I couldn't handle it at that point, and I also was just not ready for it. So like in those situations you need to like think about who's advising you, right? Because like if that person was then telling me I needed a different bike or whatever else, it's like, well, maybe you're at a different level than I am because I don't do that type of stuff. So, it's just again, taking everything with a grain of salt, knowing where your own skill set is at, where your own level of riding is, and being able to go from there.
Ride your own ride, bike your own bike.
Yeah, exactly.
Your dream bike is a destination, okay?
Yeah.
You have to go on a journey to get there. Sometimes that means buying a smaller bike and learning on it. The journey will teach you a lot, sometimes up to and including that the destination you were originally seeking is not actually where you want to go.
Right. Yep, exactly. Yeah.
It's better to make a $5,000 mistake than a $25,000 mistake.
Agreed. I mean, and that's the thing is, if you do get into this sport and for some reason you don't love it, it's going to be a lot easier for you to recoup having that type of a bike than it is to go in and buy, a Pan America, get it completely souped up and then get it out on a trail and be like, oh shit, I don't want to do this,
Yeah.
So.
Yeah. So,
yeah.
Grace.
Yes.
What advice do you have for people that are out there seeking their first off-roadish motorcycle?
Well, first I would say get a CB500X because great learning ATV bike. However, everybody is different, like we just discussed. So I would say make sure you just take into account where you're riding and what you need to get to where you need to go. Because if you need to be on road, then you're going to need to have a bike that is on and off road efficient. And don't feel like you need all the power. That's always my big thing. You need less power than you realize. Trust me. And So start small, and then if you graduate within a year, you sell your bike in a year, and that's the end of it.
That power thing is a great piece of advice because I'm a fat ass and I ride a 250F. And the only time I notice that it doesn't have enough power is on like a super steep, long hill
Yeah.
climb. I'll
Yeah.
wish I had a little more. But, I was wheeling it and everything else this last week. The same with my 300L.
Yeah.
I will occasionally notice that it doesn't have the power I wish it did to climb a hill. And over 65 on the highway, particularly going uphill, I wish I had a little more. But literally
Right.
95% of the time, it has more than enough power. You just give it more throttle, and that's
Yeah.
actually easier. It's more beginner friendly. You're less prone to making a mistake. A
Yep.
whiskey throttle is less disastrous.
Yeah.
Unlike if you're out there on the biggest, fastest bike that you can barely handle under the best of circumstances and shit starts to go sideways, you're
Yeah.
in trouble.
Exactly. Yeah. 100%. Yeah. The power thing for me is always the biggest one because I've just had so many friends with on and off road riding who I felt like went way too big too fast. And almost every time it bit them in the ass, you know? So,
Yeah, and that power also makes you ride like an asshole. I can't
it
believe
does.
the way I ride this 790
Yeah.
compared to and I'm the same person with the same skill, but I get out there and I'm like, why am I going this fast? Because I can.
Yeah. I mean, that was one of my biggest holy shit moments was when the first time I got on a Pan America a couple years ago.
If
I
I
was
could
super stoked about it. And it was when we were at Giant Loop and I took one of the bikes out to demo from Clyder and got on the road. And there's no one out there for those of you that are concerned right now. Like it's literally just a strip of road in the middle of nowhere in Oregon. And I got the bike up real fast and I was like, oh, I'm probably going 85, 90. I looked down, I was going 132 miles an hour. And I was just like, oh my God, I've never had a bike with that type of power before. So,
I had the
yeah.
same experience except I was going like 109 and I thought I'm probably going 60 and then my buddy Sean goes, wow, past me. I was like, what are you doing? But yeah,
Yeah.
we were the only ones on the road. But yeah, that thing
Yeah.
gets up and go,
Oh, yeah.
and you don't notice.
That's the thing is sometimes with the higher power bikes, you don't notice, and it's crazy because then you'll look down and be like, oh God. Hi, Tammy.
That happened to me on the DR650. I was coming home and following this log truck, assuming I was going about 55. It's a
Yeah.
log truck. And I looked down, we were going 80. And my other dual sports don't go 80. So
No.
not only was I doing a speed that I didn't know was possible on a dual sport, but it was not struggling.
No.
Like I got it up to, I'm sorry, I can't legally say, but more than that, on the bike that I borrowed, and I was shocked
Yeah.
how many numbers there were on the speedometer. That's all I'm saying.
Yeah. I mean, and that's how it happens is it's usually just like, oh, I didn't realize it was this capable. I mean, even when I had my 350 XCF, like I could gun around on that thing pretty fast whenever I wanted. And it surprised me every time. But yeah, I digress.
Yeah. That's another conversation because displacement does not equal ease of riding.
Agreed. Yes. 100%.
So know what you're buying.
Know what you're buying, y'all. You got this.
Fortunately, I have a beginner dual sport tier list video on my channel that's just super good. So just go look at that.
Yeah, go watch Ben's channel, as always.
Spoiler alert,
we love Ben.
Oh my God. But the person was like, hey, can I follow you around and make a documentary about you? But
yeah, it's
also,
true.
You have too much of an ego?
Just for our listeners and viewers, I pitched a video idea to Ben just because I wanted to shoot a mini doc about him over the summer because we all love Ben. But yeah, he was very much making fun of me for that today. But it's still going to happen.
You just made me sound like a dick. No, I just don't understand how anybody would care to watch anything ever like that made about me. Anyway, speaking of announcements for the summer, before we forget, in fact, hey, this was your idea. I'm gonna let you break it to him.
Yeah. So Ben and I have an insanely busy 3 months coming up. I think we have things going on every single weekend, including us doing events and trips together, etc. So we are going to be doing one final episode next week. That will be our last episode of the season. We're calling this season 1. We'll round it out at 20 episodes. But we are going to take a podcasting break until August, probably. And we will have some very rare opportunities, hopefully, when we're at some of these events and on these trips over the summer, to put something together for you guys, just like little check-ins, updates, and stories from the road. But for now, we'll wrap season 1 until we survive June and July and May too, because we both have a very busy May. And yeah, then we'll get back to it.
What's our topic for our final episode of the season, Grace?
I actually was thinking that our FAQ episode is one of the most popular episodes we have. The facts
Is
and
it?
question, the frequently asked questions. Did I say facts and questions? God, I need more coffee.
That's funny. It's not on my channel. It's one of the least favorite, but on the listenings, it's
Really?
people like it. Yeah, people already
So
know
what I
about
was
me.
thinking is, well, precisely that. I figured Ben and I will look at collaboratively what has been one of the more popular subjects and go from there. But I don't know. We also talked about doing the episode live too. So we have lots of options, which would be very funny. Yeah.
Yeah, we have to figure it out, I guess, because
Yeah.
although
Yeah.
we'll figure it out. We'll definitely figure it out.
We
Will it be
promise
next
it'll
week?
be
I don't know.
epic either way because it'll be the wrap of season 1. So we
Oh,
won't
dude,
let you
don't
guys
say.
down, but we will be on a mild hiatus for a minute, just getting through our what do we call this usually? The traveling circus of summer.
You don't, but we're going to start calling it that now.
Yeah.
So, in the meantime, where can people find you?
Everybody can find me on the YouTubes and on the Instagrams under The Graceful Renegade. Also, very excited to announce that both of my documentaries are going to be playing at Giant Loop this year. So if you're going to Giant Loop with Ben and I, you will get to watch both of those, which will be very, very awesome. Ben, where can everybody find you, sir?
Well, on Instagram, I'm a dork in the road. I think I've been shadow banned from TikTok, so I might stop posting there because my last 2 have gotten like 11 views.
Oh my God.
And one of them was the windscreen video that got 15 million views on Instagram, and it got
so
no
crazy.
shit like 36. So it's just not pushing out my stuff. I don't know, maybe because I took a break.
Yeah.
Either way, but I'm on there, but you apparently will never see me. And of course, YouTube, Dork in the Road, and appearing many places this summer, including Giant Loop, Turatech, the Get On ADV Fest. We'll be at the 3-Step Rodeo. We're going to be all over the damn place this summer, and I'm excited. I'm going to make another video about that because, well, I need to maybe make a video just so I can keep track of it all.
Sounds good to me. Well, in the meantime, everybody, we will see you / be in your ear holes again next week for a final episode of season 1. Thank you for being here. We appreciate and love all of you. Don't forget to live wild, ride free.
I'm gonna make so many ear holes. Prepare your ear holes. And please do not forget to be excellent to your ear holes. Oh, thank you.
Bye.